I'm Joel McLeod, and welcome to the 905er. Almost a month after the federal election, the results in Milton East, Halton Hills South have finally been tabulated. The declared victor in the election is Liberal Kristina Tesser Derksen, beating conservative Parm Gill by the slimmest of margins at 21 votes. On election night, it appeared that Gill would win the riding. However, as the night dragged on, the results saw back and forth. No winner was declared, and the count was put on hold until the next morning. Over the course of the last few weeks, recounts were conducted under law and with supervision by scrutineers from all parties. At the end of the day, though, Elections Canada declared that Kristina Tesser Derksen had been elected by the people to represent them. So why was this not the definitive story? Conspiracy theories have erupted online of vote tampering and ballots not being counted or added, and that Elections Canada has interfered to sway the vote to the Liberals. These conspiracies undermine the legitimacy of our electoral process. Our elections at both the provincial and federal levels are some of the most secure, transparent, and definitive processes on the planet. You may not like the person representing you in the government, but you cannot deny that they are elected lawfully. That's democracy. So, to get to the bottom of what happened in Milton and what's in store for Milton's newest MP, I asked friend of the podcast, Laura Steiner, to come on and talk. Laura is a local journalist with the Milton Reporter, who covers all things Milton and followed this story as it unfolded. Links to Laura's work are in our show notes. Have a listen. Okay, well, thank you, Laura Steiner of the Milton Reporter, for coming on to talk once again, all things Milton. Well, I guess more specifically this time, the aftermath of the federal election in Milton, and how it turned into a bit of a I don't want to say drama, but there was a bit of drama just going back and forth all this time until finally we have a determination of who has won the seat of up in Milton. So, Laura, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome. Glad to try and explain what happened, I
Well,
guess.
I do because no, I guess in this day and age, uh, these stories do need to be told because this is
Yeah,
how we get the misinformation and I think it is the undermining of our democracy that you can't trust the electoral system. And I am
yeah,
of the opinion that our electoral systems at the provincial and the federal level are very reliable, very trustworthy, um, and can be relied upon to under the current rules to get to determine a legitimate member of parliament, regardless of party affiliation. So I do think that this is an important conversation to have. Uh,
yeah.
so I'm glad to come in. So that preamble out of the way, tell us, I guess, definitively who is now the MP for Milton South Halton Hills. If that's the name of the new riding.
Milton, it took me a while to get my tongue around it too, but it's Milton East, Halton Hills South, and the South Halton Hills is actually actually the southern tip of Georgetown.
Of course it
So
is.
yeah, so it's kind of a weird, kind of a strange shaped writing because it goes up in, I think it even in the northern edge of it goes up into Wellington as
But
well.
this is
So
a new writing for this that you're electing a brand new
yeah,
MP for this election, starting in this election. This is one of the new writings that was formed after the
yeah.
latest census.
And the new MP elect is Kristina Tesser Derksen of the Liberal Party of Canada.
And on election night, I remember following it, and I was going to bed. I knew there were a number of writings across the country that were still to be counted. I just said, okay, I'm not staying up till forever to count this. But when that was at that on election night, it was conservative, was it not?
Yes, it was veering conservative. I was actually at the election night party with the Liberal Party, with the Liberal candidate, and I kept checking my phone and it kept saying 200 of 200, there 101 polls. and this kept going throughout out the night. There was a bit of a pattern to the results here, where suddenly the Conservative candidate, who was Parm Gill, would be ahead by 500 votes, and then it would shrink, and then suddenly it would be back to 500 votes. So that was that was what happened on election night. I stayed up pretty late. Uh, the party was going on until 2 and 3 in the morning to figure out who won. And no one effectively, I went to bed not knowing who won and woke up to find out that still no one had won because they hadn't finished counting some of the ballots, which were considered special ballots.
And
And that was the 201st, that would happen to be the 201st poll. Elections Canada had called off Elections Canada had basically paused it
right.
overnight, I guess, to give everybody some rest.
And
Because
just to jump in though, just clarify for our listeners, what are the special ballots? Because that's kind of where people are getting into the conspiracy
yeah,
theories of what, ooh, these mystery ballots appeared out of nowhere, and
yeah,
that's not the case. So I'm just, if you could just explain
no,
to our listeners what those are.
it's definitely not the case. The special ballots are, you can vote effectively. You can vote anytime from when the polls open, anytime from when the election is called to when the polls open on election day at an Elections Canada riding office. And the special ballots fit in because at the very beginning, before advanced polls, you're basically writing the name of your chosen candidate down on the ballot paper.
Hmm.
So that's one kind of special ballot. I think there was even some ballots from advanced polls there as well. And there's also uh so like as an example, this sort of I'm going a little bit off topic, but this sort of happened in Taiwan, where there's like a lot of you can vote outside your riding,
Right.
basically at an elections office with a special ballot, and then they package it up, send it off to um, send it off to your riding's election office, and that's where your um, ballot counts as well. It doesn't count at the if let's say if let's say you're staying out in Nova Scotia, your
Right.
home riding is Milton. Go to your home, go to the election office, and you can effectively vote for a Milton candidate, and they package up your ballot and send it back
And these are
to
also
Milton.
used like if you're in the military serving overseas,
Yeah,
but you live
and that
in
too.
Milton, or if you're a Canadian citizen who happens to be overseas when the election is called, you can mail in these ballots. And I have done a special ballot in a previous election, which is surprising. Like it makes you feel very secure. Like you walk in and they say, okay, here's a list of all the candidates that are authorized to run in the riding. You physically write out the name. They ask you, don't like define a partnership, like print very clearly block letters so we know who you're
Yeah,
voting for. Write it out on a sheet of paper. They put it in an envelope, and then that envelope is put inside another envelope, and then you put it into like a
yeah,
special box. And I was like, holy cow! Like I was like, are they having like three people watching me as I put this ballot in? So it's not you know,
yeah,
it's secure, secure, secure. So at the end of the day, there was a lot of a ballot recount, and at the end of the day,
yeah.
the Liberal candidate, Kristina Derksen, and I can't remember her full last name. She has a hyphenated.
Kristina Tesser Derksen.
Thank you. Won, but by a very slim margin of votes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, by 20, she won by 21
Right.
votes, and that was an 8 vote difference from the validation results, which the the judicial recount happened because there was a part of this is another part of the procedure is the returning officer at the Elections Canada riding office goes through the results and of election night and compares them to what was basically compares what she wrote down to the actual results.
Hmm.
And that took about 4 days.
Right. And then there was a judicial recount. And they finally, and the thing is with those recounts, they're not behind closed doors, so to speak. Like there are, my understanding is there's lawyers and there's witnesses from all the parties
Yeah.
in the room watching as like the thousands of votes are hand counted. So it's not, you can't say, oh, it's done by like, secret elections Canada manipulators in a room. It's very much transparent out in the open. Any like the parties are
Yeah.
there to watch what is going on. And they're looking for screw ups too. Like they're looking for like, okay, is there a reason why I can go and file something in the courts to challenge this result?
Yeah. Well, the even from like election night, there are scrutineers involved, right?
Hmm.
So they can challenge they can challenge different ballots based on how they're marked, most for the most part.
Right.
And the scrutineers are also involved in the court process. I just don't think per se it's not really it's public in one sense because there's everybody watching it, but in another sense, like I can't go as a reporter and report on
Right.
it because it's the nature, my sense, at least that's my sense, because it's like the nature of what's going on. It's the secrecy of the ballot. It's the anonymity of the vote.
Right. But I guess but at the end of the day, though, a it's not closed off to only kind of insiders as the conspiracy theorists
No.
want to frame it as. I mean, you have these are party lawyers who are actively looking for a reason to challenge something
Yeah.
in the court of law, like, and so the pressures there, like you have to get this right, and if you make
Yeah.
a decision, it's got to be something that a lawyer can say, yeah, I can't challenge that in a court of law. Um, no judge is going to reasonably welcome that in.
No.
Um, so now that all the dust is settled, we now have a liberal MP for Milton. What's the vibe then in Milton per se? Like, are people happy with this result? Can you tell? Or I mean, this was a close victory, and I know like we still have to wait and see. But for a while, it appeared like Milton, the Brampton was going to go Tory blue. At the end of the day, that did not happen. But I mean, just by the slim, barest margins of votes. And I'm just wondering, what's the vibe on the ground? Are people kind of content with this? Are these people upset? Are people like what are we
I,
feeling?
well, I think there's like one vibe in the general world, in the outside world, and there's another vibe online. The vibe in reality is, I think there's a bit of relief, really. There's a bit of, yeah, and are pretty pleased and excited about um, what Kristina Tesser Derksen can do for the community. Because she's really, uh, like all accounts, I don't think you can say, I know her personally, and I don't think you can say a bad thing about her. So
What
she's
was her?
been really,
I was
go
just gonna
on.
say, what was her background? What was her
She
claim to fame before running?
um she's actually Ward 1 municipal councilor, or
Okay.
was. So she was out there in the community a lot, and and she's known across sort of George. She's a local person as well. She's born in this area, and she's lived most of her life here, and all that. So it in one sense, it's true local representation. But
Hmm.
as I said, there's also a sense online that it was, it was all that the votes don't count, that, et cetera, et cetera. Um, we would have been better off with Parm Gill, who I think it probably contributes to the who is was not very well liked and thought was not very well thought of as an MPP here. So
Well, well, he was the MPP for Milton, who
yeah,
infamously stepped down from Doug Ford's provincial
yeah.
caucus to run for Pierre Poilievre as in the last election. That clearly didn't work out well for him. Now, were people I guess my question is, like, what were the people's response to that? Because my understanding was some people found it to be a little bit of an opportunistic play on his part, because at the time, Pierre had this massive 20-point lead in the polls, and it looked like it was going to be a conservative supermajority, and he was just going to walk into Ottawa as Milton's MP. That clearly didn't turn out. And I'm wondering, what did that play a factor into people not jumping on the Parm Gill bandwagon?
Um, Possibly. It's likely, but it is like you pointed out a couple minutes ago. It was the slimmest of margins.
Hmm.
Like I don't you can't get much smaller than 21 votes to be
Well,
to be honest. So
Terrebonne in
yeah,
Quebec with one.
other than Tavon with like one or a tie,
Hmm.
it's I think the jury's still out on that one.
Right.
But he wasn't very well liked, and during the campaign, I sort of like we ended up myself and my colleagues over at and colleagues over at Village Media kind of there was one day where we ended up tag teaming him almost. They did a story about there was a lot about signs like more malicious than usual,
Hmm.
and so they where police complaints were in where the Liberal campaign made complaints both in Milton and Georgetown, and over like the damage, and I think I want to say theft in some of it, over the damage of of some signs, even one on I heard even I heard even one sign on somebody's front lawn was damaged who happened to be a volunteer with Kristina Tesser Derksen, and um so there was that, and then I had a story on I did an I'm in the I have an my advanced poll happened to be the senior center,
Hmm.
Milton Seniors Activity Center, which if you know the area is over on Childs Drive in Ontario Street near the police station. And that was my advanced poll. And I went there on the advanced weekend, and I also happened to used to work some federal elections, and I noticed there were things that maybe weren't exactly. Um, Basically, the polling station appeared to be too small for the area, for the particular room it was in, and it turns out that. And I talked to some of the workers, and the workers said that they would have been more comfortable too in a bigger space.
Hmm.
And the only space was the auditorium. And I found out that the auditorium had been booked for an event. And it ended up that there was this a local seniors group had booked the event and had booked the auditorium. And both conservative candidates, there's Milton, neighboring Milton West, North Burlington, as well as Milton East, were at were invited to this event, and I have sources that could put them on stage talking about the federal election and
This
asking
was
for support
this was
for the
on
conservatives.
election day.
This was on advanced poll
Oh,
day.
okay, okay.
This was on the whole Easter weekend. The East, the so election. There was a complaint lodged with Elections Canada about it, because it was almost influencing the vote, because you had the
Well, my
auditorium where this was at the front of the building, and you just walk down the hallway,
mhm.
and there were the polling station in the cafeteria.
Well, my if my recollection states, you're not allowed to do any direct campaigning on those advanced polling days. Those days are reserved for pulling out, getting your vote out to the polls. Or am I mistaken on the rules?
It's I think I think you can campaign on advanced polling days, but you can't campaign on a
Right,
at a building where there happens to be a federal election poll,
right.
like active voting going on. That's
So,
that's sort of
so what were
that's
the
viewed as influence that's
right?
potentially influencing the vote, so to speak.
So, what was the response from Parm Gill's campaign on those accusations?
Um, that the event was booked before the election happens,
Well,
which could be, but it's
that yeah, no doubt it was because where. I mean, it was, but the fact is, he still took to the microphone to say, "Come, come vote for me." Like he didn't have to step up on the stage.
you know. So I
So
don't know what happened. He's just kind of
yeah, fair enough.
so that was
The
kind of I was surprised at that. And apparently, like I checked with the town. I checked around. There was this one group. The group is the Ontario or Milton Seniors Forum,
mhm,
and almost a lot of people I talked to for that story had never heard of them. And
right.
apparently, it wasn't listed on the town's website. It wasn't listed on the group's website. So it's kind of uh, something something odd obviously is going on. So
So if that's so, when my red flag kind of goes up when I see those kind of strange groups appearing. All of a sudden, they always just come out of the woodwork during campaigns, but they have no other uh, uh, presence outside of a writ period. Is how yeah in your mind, how important is Milton then for the Conservatives to win to make an inroads into Milton, Halton, uh, and I guess the neighboring ridings?
how important is it? I would say it was very important. Adam under the former riding, it was the riding of Milton, and Adam was a pretty capable was a pretty solid NP for us.
Hmm.
So you already sort of had that liberal brand going into this campaign,
Hmm.
and um, I think probably the conservatives to grab it would have been a pretty big get.
So what's the
But
holdup for? Or I was just gonna think like the 905. I thought that the Conservatives were going to make some inroads in Milton, Peel, and definitely north, in the north of the 905. That didn't really happen this election. The 905 kind of stayed liberal red. What I why do you think that is like was that purely just Mark Carney's presence on the campaign trail? Because before this election, we were all facing the idea was just going to be totally Tory blue all the way through.
yeah,
And then that just stopped dead it looks like that just got stopped dead in the water. Is that entirely on Mark Carney, or is there something else that my thoughts like maybe that support was kind of like water thin?
um, whether there was something else, I don't. Your guess is as good. I don't know really.
Mhm.
I would imagine that Parm. I would imagine that the like I can say as a voter for me, the quality of candidates have a lot to do with it. Like I've said to friends that like I've reported on this guy before, and sort of the it's not really the kind of conservative that I think should be representing that party. But and I think and generally my theory is that the conservatives are a bit further to the right than most Canadian conservatives are.
Are they
And that's something that probably figures into it a lot.
is so going forward? I guess I do agree with that assessment. Like the federal conservative party do seem to be out of lock and step with how right mainstream Canadians are willing to go. Um, and I'm wondering, it's like, is that the sense, like, does the local riding associations get that? Like, are they feeling that on the ground, or is there just a matter of let's dig deeper into our holes and stay and double down on the right wing rhetoric, as opposed to kind of sticking with, I always thought it was uh table, kitchen table issues, affordability, putting more, like, cutting taxes, that kind of thing, as
Yeah.
opposed to the
Um,
more socially conservative aspects that some of the
yeah.
party likes to
There
indulge in.
is sort of um a lot of the writing associations. I don't think it's I don't think it's that hard to do a Google search and you find an unhappy conservative writing association. I know that there's been some, like, again, under the former alignment there was some breaks over in a DMAC bar, specifically over, I think it's even public record now, that specifically over the treatment of former former MP Lisa Raitt. So I think that could be a part of it is the writing associations, but actually to go back to your comment about Mark Carney, I kept I know I kept listening for the conservatives to try and make that turn into the tariffs, to realize it's even to just acknowledge that it was a problem. Like,
Mhm.
they had some good thoughts on finance, on housing, on what other on crime, but you need to package that with an overall acknowledgement that and say, but right now Canada is facing a bigger problem with trade,
Mhm.
right? So I kept listening for that, and that never happened. And I think that's probably what the 905 was probably listening for as well. And it never did, and it never materialized.
I think they kind of got stuck in their messaging. They were pretty much convinced that it would be no a carbon tax election, and then they could pivot that into crime, which, as I agree with your assessment there, that never really became the election topic. Uh, I guess I'm wondering, the other thought that kind of popped in my head is, do you, from talking with people in Milton, do you get a sense there might be a bit of buyer's remorse with another liberal government so far? Because we've now been about a month out of the election. They're starting to actually get things done. I mean, there's kind of Mark Carney's talk, or they've kind of muddied the waters a bit on housing prices, which is a big factor here in Milton and the
Yeah.
905. And then, this might be too soon, so if it is, tell me. But recently, the Supreme Court said they would not hear the Halton Region's case on the intermodal hub that CN plans to build in Milton. And I'm just wondering, like, I guess what's the foreseeable problems that this new Mark Carney Liberal government is going to face here in the 905 from your perspective? Just like housing prices, and now you've got this fight over the intermodal hub that is not going away. Um,
Yeah.
what do you kind of see is going to be some of the big issues in the next few months, let's say, as opposed to
I think, well, I think there's a certain, and I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty because around the Mark Carney government, because we go from and a bit of an adjustment period, because we go from Justin Trudeau after 10 years,
mhm,
we basically knew what we were getting with this guy, and it wasn't going to be what maybe arguably what the country needed. And furthermore, he was distracted by so much scandal and the foreign interference. The foreign interference was a
mhm.
got to be a pretty big one, and probably if he were remained liberal leader, it would still. be a pretty big factor. But and then you're switching to suddenly Mark Carney, who's normal and almost, dare I say it, who's normal and in comparison pretty boring.
True.
So I think it's suddenly from we're kind of adjusting to going from this guy that couched everything in big dramatic pronouncements
Hmm.
to this guy that maybe doesn't show all his cards right away, and going straight for, and more like he's more like letting his actions speak
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
well. And that's, I think, for a lot of people jarring, and that's probably generating some of the response. But what was the other part of that?
Well, just wondering what the future,
And
what was some of the future problems? Because I was thinking of, yeah, his
the CN intermodal, I think,
saying in intermodal,
will be a
because
bigger one. I think because um, the Supreme Court, I think, was the last. I think was I'm going to say it was
well,
um,
I can
the
picture some.
last step, so to speak. But I mean, you look around, um, you've got Adams Secretary of State for Sport. You've got Karina Gould, who's no longer in cabinet. You've
Mhm.
got Anita Anand, who's Foreign Affairs Minister um, for Vancouver, and Ms. Anand and Anita Anand. They're at the cabinet table, but can they really be a voice for against CN? Um, I know, I know Adam made a big pronouncement during the campaign that he was going to meet with Mark Carney and talk it out about CN. But you have to, with the way things are going with tariffs and the chain of supply chain, that's it. And the supply chain
Mhm.
issues generated by those tariffs, you have to imagine that a facility like the intermodal in a place like Milton, connected to 407, down the road from the Queen Elizabeth Way, not too far from the 401, is going to
Well,
might be
also Carney's made
near
a
the
big
top.
part of his government is to build these big uh, nation building projects, and now everyone assumes it's pipelines. But I look at something like the intermodal project would be tying into that. That's going to be a big in terms of trade. The idea is all the shops and stuff around the 905 drive their trucks up to the intermodal, puts it on a train, and it gets shipped out to Quebec or out west to be sold.
Yeah.
That's gonna like that seems like part and parcel for what Mark Carney is envisioning, I'm presuming, for Canada and kind of where the 905 fits into it. And my thoughts are we voted in this liberal government again, and I'm wondering if people there's going to be a bit of a fight. I'm thinking there's a couple of fights I think Justin Trudeau put off for too long, and Mark Carney's going to have to fight them. One is this intermodal hub specifically. The other is housing
Yeah.
prices. I do think housing prices at some point in the 905 have to start coming down, and he's going to have to pick a fight with Doug Ford at the provincial level to say, how are we going to get this building, all these buildings done? Do you can you do you see what I'm talking about, or am I just kind
Yeah.
of picture my head? I'm picturing a
So
lot of
you're saying
conflict the next.
housing, obviously housing and business.
Right. I don't see how this
Yeah.
like what
Well,
like
the housing piece, and I noticed, and I think this is why it's such a close result as well, was both of like as both the liberals and the conservatives had something in their platform where they were saying we're going to give this much of a we're going to give a discount on development charges.
right.
And I thought, how is that even possible? Because um it's two levels of government below the federal government. And in most provinces, I know in Ontario, from the Milton example, that um, they rely on development charges um, are a valid source of revenue for the
Right.
municipalities. and the province has already interfered enough by changing how and when they're charged. Like it's either I think it's now it's either like day the day they start building or the day they sign the papers or something. I think whichever is lower.
Hmm.
So that's a cut. That's a cut to municipal revenues. So I don't know how the federal government, and this would be true of a conservative government as well. I don't know how they can tie things to municipalities like that.
Well, my question was always, at what point does the province tell Ottawa stay out of our jurisdiction? I mean, the municipalities are entirely creatures of the province, and the province is what can come in and say, okay, we'll change how you raise revenue. Right now, it's all property tax, but the province could say we could change that. We say you, I don't know, you can have an income tax at the municipal level. I'm not saying that that's a good idea. I'm just saying the province could institute
Yeah,
that. But for the federal government to come and say, well, we'll pay the development charge bill or whatever the case may be,
yeah,
like that. I just know like the province doesn't like Doug Ford wants to have all the power over natural resource development, which is good, but then you're going to give up the power over how municipalities grow and operate to the federal level. Like it's one of those things like again, I just picture a fight coming at some point with Ottawa say
yeah.
or Queen's Park saying Ottawa, stay out of our neighborhood. Like literally stay out of our neighborhoods. But at the end of the day, does that get housing built?
At the end of the day, probably, I'm gonna say probably, I don't know. It's probably 50-50 because some of these developments going up here in Milton, I can actually look out my office window and maybe see or my kitchen window and see like the tip of a condo building built at Darien, Ontario. Some of these buildings were actually approved about 6 years ago.
Hmm.
So it might it might get building done because the approval processes have been so slow. But then once everything catches up to itself, then it's probably going to slow right down. And I think there's also a certain element of, of people starting to slowly realize that those condos, as a friend of mine calls them, like metal metal boxes in the sky, so to speak, are not the best place to be raising a family,
Well,
and the demand might go, the demand might be for more like larger units that can accommodate a family.
that's the idea of like that missing middle, right? That
Yeah.
the middle density that I mean, the talk of like a fourplex building being built in neighborhoods that Ford is adamantly opposed to might be what the secret is to allow a new family move in there, raise the kids for a bit, and then move into an actual, as they say in the tech world, level up as
Mhm.
you go. The I before I let you go, there was one question. What's the how do with the at the provincial level there are conservative MPPs, liberal MPs. I'm wondering how is that relationship working so far to get things done for Milton? Is it an amicable relationship, or are we looking at
Here, I I think it's amicable. I think it's going to be pretty amicable for a bit because well the current MPP was is a former counselor,
right?
and I think much has been said and made of the fact that the guy used to be liberal as well. So so I think there's some some crossover on that.
I'm curious to see how that relationship unfolds because I'm making a prediction, folks, is that over the next year or so we're going to see these two governments butt heads over something important. I'm thinking particularly on the housing file here in the 905.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to see how that relationship unfolds. If that's going to be a relationship that kind of helps keep the two levels of government working together, or if it kind of disintegrates and becomes something ugly. I don't know.
Yeah, on that side of it though, I think maybe we should watch Cabinet a little bit because um they left some pretty notable names off their list. Bill Blair is out
Hmm.
as defense minister, and Nate Smith, who apparently there's reports that he was preparing, he was he thought he was going to get a cabinet post but didn't. And those are sort of 416 905 names that are now out. I wonder if on purpose some people were held. Karina Gould as well. I wonder if some of those names were actually held back for a bench strength, so that in case he needs to make a change, and some of those ministers have been in there a while,
Hmm. It's not
um,
it's not a
he's got
bad.
the bench strength to do it. So
Well, I questioned the
then that would
it's
the
not a
fighting over it too.
it's
So
not a bad theory. I do question his judgment on counter. I did kind of scratch my head at and say, okay, that was a choice. On the Nate Erskine Smith file, I've pondered, does that leave him open then to say, okay, well, I can reignite my run for provincial liberal leader, because I don't think Bonnie Crombie has a strong support within the party grassroots. And there are a lot of people who have buyer's remorse in the Ontario Liberal Party at the moment. And the question is, well, who do you get to replace her? I'm wondering if there might be a draft Nate campaign brought in, because I don't think Bonnie's done a great job of uh, encouraging the grassroots of the party that everything is all right there.
that's a good point. I don't know, but I sort of because I just watching her at different liberal events as well, just kind of behind the scenes. She sort of is kind of she was comforting in sort of the wake of the losses and stuff. And I think just watching her around other people, I think there's something like that sort of a bit of that's one side of leadership as well. So sorry for stammering.
We time will tell. I could be completely
Yeah.
shouting into the wind, as they say. So we shall see. But yeah, it's always interesting to talk politics in the 905 with you, Laura. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for coming on today, and kind of clearing up that, yeah, our electoral system does work, and how the leaders, the people that we
It
get, are legit.
it works. I have no idea where the conspiracy theories come from because I kept thinking because the ballots are counted effectively twice because you've got the DRO that's
Right.
calling out the names and then the tallying of the poll clerk tallies it up and then they're counted again when they get to the elections office and the validation process and it's not
It's something
like
about pen. It's just something about pen and
it's
paper.
just and yeah, pencil and paper because pen and even marker I would imagine could lead through some of the ballots, right? Because
Oh,
you get
maybe
your Sharpie and it might still be wet. Throw
I've
it.
never I've yeah, I've been through many elections that in my time. I've never once encountered anything that made me say, "Oh, how's this going to
No,
pan out?" Um, it's very simplistic, but it works, and it's definitively um I think it's just definitively, like, it counts. We can rest easy that the person who is representing us is the person that the people chose. You may
yeah,
not like the choice, but that's democracy. Work better next time.
yeah, that's the
Well,
way she goes.
that's the way she goes. Thank you very much, Laura. All the
You're
best,
welcome.
and
You too.
we'll talk soon.
Okay.